Nathaniel Brooks was 13 years old the morning his father came home with another woman on his arm, and his mother did not cry. She stood at the top of the staircase with a leather folder pressed flat against her chest, and she watched William Brooks walk through the front door of Brooks' estate, like a man who believed he still owned everything inside it. She let him believe that, for exactly 1 hour. If this story moved you, subscribe to this channel and follow along until the very end, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The summer of 1818 had been a long one. Nathaniel Brooks had spent the better part of 5 months counting the days until his father came home. He'd kept a rough tally on the back of a scrap of ledger paper he found in his mother's study. One small mark for each morning. He woke up, and his father was still gone. 143 marks in all. He'd stopped making them 2 weeks ago, not because he'd stopped counting, but because somewhere around mark 130-something in him had shifted. Quietly. The way a door shifts on old hinges, not slamming, just slowly drifting out of its frame. He didn't tell his mother about the marks. He didn't tell anyone. Elizabeth Brooks ran the household in her husband's absence. The way she ran everything else in her life, with steady hands and a quiet mouth, and a mind that was always 3 steps ahead of whatever problem was walking toward her. She rose before the kitchen staff every morning. She reviewed the farm ledgers every evening by lamplight. She wrote the letters to the tobacco buyers in Richmond herself in her own hand, without waiting for William's instructions to arrive by post, because William's instructions had stopped arriving sometime around March, and Elizabeth had simply decided to proceed without them. She did not complain about this. She did not explain herself to anyone who asked. She only said, when pressed by neighbors or by the household staff, the estate runs as it always has. Nathaniel watched her. He watched her the way a boy watches his mother when he is old enough to understand that something is wrong, but not old enough to name what it is. He watched her sit at the long oak table in the study and drag her finger down column after column of numbers, pausing, correcting, pressing her lips together when she found something that didn't add up. He watched her walk the rows of tobacco fields on hot July mornings, speaking to the foreman, directly asking questions that made the older men shift uncomfortably on their feet because they weren't used to answering to a woman, and Elizabeth knew it and asked her questions anyway. He watched her, and he understood in the way that children understand things before they have words for them that his mother was holding something together that was not supposed to be hers to hold. He also understood, though he could not have explained it, that she was very good at it. The morning. William Brooks came home. Nathaniel was in the yard behind the east wing, working through the geometry problems his tutor had left him before taking the week off for a family matter in Fredericksburg. It was already hot before 9 o'clock. The kind of Virginia summer heat that settles in early and doesn't apologize for it. He had his jacket off and his sleeves rolled up, and he was lying on his stomach in the grass with the workbook open in front of him when he heard the wheels on the drive. He knew the sound of his father's carriage before he saw it. He'd known that sound since he was 4 years old. The particular rhythm of those wheels on that gravel, the way the horses moved when they were coming in from a long road. He knew it, the way he knew the sound of the creak behind the south field, or the particular creak of the third step on the main staircase. He was on his feet before he'd thought about standing. He picked up his jacket. He ran his fingers through his hair. He straightened up in the way boys straighten when they want to look like they haven't been lying in the grass, and he walked around to the front of the house, and he felt something open in his chest, some tight wound-up thing he'd been carrying for 5 months without realizing how heavy it was, and he thought, "Father is home." He came around the corner of the house just as the carriage door opened. His father stepped out first. William Brooks, at 42, was a tall man, broad through the shoulders, with the kind of confident bearing that came not from physical size alone, but from 42 years of being told that the world was arranged for his benefit. He wore a dark coat despite the heat, and he moved the way he always moved, like a man who expected every room to rearrange itself around him the moment he walked into it. Nathaniel lifted one hand. He almost called out. Then the second figure stepped down from the carriage. She took William's offered hand to step down, and William gave it willingly. And there was something in the easy, practiced way he extended that hand, like it was something he had done many times on this particular journey, that stopped Nathaniel where he stood. She was young. That was the first thing Nathaniel registered. Not much older than the daughters of some of the families his mother had called upon over the years. She had light-colored dress and light-colored hair, and she moved with the kind of ease that came from having grown up in a house where people moved easily, where no one watched the cost of anything. She looked at the front of Brooks' estate, the way people looked at things they were deciding whether to keep. William said something to her low private. She smiled. Nathaniel stood very still. His father had not yet looked at him. The household staff had come out by then, not all of them, but enough. Hannah, who had been with the since before Nathaniel was born, stood at the top of the front steps, with her hands folded in front of her, and an expression on her face that Nathaniel couldn't quite read. Thomas, who managed the house staff, was somewhere behind her. Two of the younger girls stood near the side door, not quite coming forward, not quite retreating. William Brooks came up the front steps with the woman beside him. He paused at the top of the steps and he looked out at the assembled household, the way a general looks out at a formation, measuring, assessing, already calculating. "Good morning," he said. His voice was the same as it always was, deep, certain, carrying. "I trust everything has been kept in order." It wasn't a question. Hannah said, "Yes, sir." William nodded, as though he'd expected nothing less. He looked at the woman beside him. "This is Miss Caroline Whitmore," he said. "She has traveled a considerable distance and will be a guest of this household. I expect she will be shown every courtesy." He paused. "This home will have new arrangements. Miss Whitmore will require a suite of rooms on the east wing, permanently." Nathaniel heard Hannah breathe in. He heard Thomas say very quietly, something under his breath that Nathaniel couldn't make out. Caroline Whitmore smiled at no one in particular. It was the smile of a woman who had been told possibly many times that her smile was one of her best features, and who had come to rely on it in moments of social discomfort as a kind of shield. William turned to go inside, and then he saw Nathaniel. He stopped. For a long moment, father and son looked at each other across the top of the front steps, and Nathaniel waited for something. He didn't know what exactly. Something. A hand extended. A word. "Son, you've grown. Son, I miss the house. Son, let me explain." William Brooks said, "You've let your hair get long." Then he walked inside. Nathaniel stood on the front steps for a long time after the door closed. The heat pressed down. Somewhere across the yard a horse stamped and shifted. He was aware of Hannah watching him from just inside the doorway, aware of the careful, deliberate way she was pretending not to watch him. He did not go inside immediately. He sat down on the top step and he looked out at the drive where the carriage still stood. Horses not yet unhitched, luggage not yet unloaded, and he thought very carefully, very deliberately, the way a 13-year-old thinks about something when he is determined not to feel it before he has understood it about what had just happened. His father had come home. His father had brought a woman with him. His father had said this, "Home will have new arrangements in the same flat." Declarative tone, he used to announce changes to the harvest schedule. His father had looked at him after 5 months away and told him his hair was too long. Nathaniel had 143 marks on a piece of ledger paper in his room. He pressed the heels of his hands against the stone step, and he breathed in slow and steady, and he thought, all right then. He got up and went inside. Dang! His mother was in the study. He heard her before he saw her. The specific sound of her moving through the room with purpose, not hurried but deliberate. The sound of drawers opening and closing and papers being placed with quiet, exact precision. He pushed the study door open, and she was standing at the long oak desk with the leather folder she'd been carrying that morning open in front of her, and she was sorting documents into 2 neat stacks with the focused attention of a woman who was doing something she had prepared to do for a long time. "Mama," he said. "Close the door, Nathaniel," she said without looking up. He closed the door. She went on sorting for a moment. Then she looked up. Elizabeth Brooks had brown eyes and a face that people often described when they thought they were being kind as handsome, meaning that she had the kind of face that didn't rely on softness, that carried its character in the set of the jaw and the directness of the gaze, rather than in any particular sweetness of feature. She was not a small woman. She stood straight. She had the kind of stillness that came from long practice controlling exactly what her body communicated. She looked at her son for a moment. "Are you all right?" she said. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "Then, who is she?" Elizabeth looked at him steadily. "I expect you heard your father's introduction." "I heard what he said. I'm asking who she is." His mother was quiet for a moment. She looked back down at the documents. "She is someone your father has decided to bring into this house," she said. "What that means exactly, what he is planning, what he believes he has the right to do, is something I intend to make very clear to him before this day is over." "You knew," Nathaniel said. It came out before he decided to say it. "You knew he was bringing someone. That's why you had that folder this morning." Elizabeth did not deny it. She set the last document into the right-hand stack and straightened them with one precise motion. "I suspected," she said. "Suspected for several months. I spent those months ensuring that when confirmation arrived, I would be ready to respond to it." Nathaniel looked at the 2 stacks of paper. "What's in there?" "Everything," his mother said simply. "Every transaction your father authorized from this estate over the past 14 months. Every letter of credit. Every bank arrangement. Every contract drawn against the Brooks land holdings." She paused. "Every unauthorized withdrawal made against the trust account designated for your education and inheritance." Nathaniel went very still. "Against my—" "Yes." The room was quiet except for the sound of the summer heat pressing against the window panes. "How much?" Nathaniel asked. His mother looked at him for a long moment, considering he understood how much a 13-year-old ought to hear. Then she seemed to decide that her son had passed the point where protecting him from the truth was a kindness. "Enough," she said, "that without the corrections I made to the estate accounts over the past 3 months, you would have had very little left to inherit." The confrontation came that afternoon. Nathaniel was not supposed to be in the hallway outside the east parlor. He was fully aware that he was not supposed to be there. He'd been sent gently but clearly to the upper library after lunch, and he had gone, and he had stayed for approximately 40 minutes before the pull of what was happening 2 floors below became stronger than his ability to sit still, and he had come quietly down the back stairs and positioned himself in the narrow hallway outside the east parlor door, which had been left open a precise inch by someone he suspected, Hannah, who was perhaps not entirely unsympathetic to the idea of Nathaniel hearing what was said. His father's voice came through the gap clearly. "Presume to question my decisions in my own home, Elizabeth. That has never been part of our arrangement." "Our arrangement," his mother's voice said, level, unhurried, the way she said everything, "was that this estate would be managed in the interests of this family. That is the arrangement I have honored. I am asking whether you can say the same." "I don't answer to you. You answer to this." The sound of paper being placed on a surface. "These are the bank records from the Richmond office. These are the quarterly accounts from the estate manager. These are the records of the trust fund established for Nathaniel's majority." A pause. "And these are the withdrawal slips authorizing funds transferred out of that trust to a private account in Philadelphia, bearing your signature over a period of 11 months. Silence. "You had no legal authority to touch that account," his mother said. "The trust was established under terms that require dual authorization, both your signature and mine. These withdrawals carry your signature only." Another pause. "The bank manager is an honest man. When I wrote to him 2 months ago asking whether any irregularities existed in the Brooks accounts, he answered me honestly because he is the kind of man who does not enjoy being part of something that will eventually require him to look a woman in the eye and explain why her son's inheritance was emptied without her knowledge." "You had no right," his father started. "I had every right," his mother said. "I am a legal party to that trust. I am Nathaniel's mother, and I am the person who has kept this estate from collapse for the past 5 months while you were occupied elsewhere." His father said something, then lower harder the way he spoke when he was moving past bluster into something more deliberate. Nathaniel pressed closer to the door. "Not going to stand in my own house and be lectured by William." His mother's voice didn't rise. It never rose. It just went quieter, and somehow that was worse. The way a candle burning down to nothing was in some ways more alarming than an open flame. I have not finished. The bank accounts are one matter. There is another. A pause. I received a letter 3 weeks ago, she said, from an attorney in Richmond, a firm I did not recognize. They were writing on behalf of a client. They did not name him, but they were not as careful as they perhaps should have been, and the nature of the inquiry made the identity of the client quite clear. She paused. The letter inquired into the legal requirements for establishing that a wife and mother was unfit to maintain guardianship over a minor child. It asked specifically about the process by which a father might petition to have sole legal custody of a son assigned to his own management, and about the legal mechanisms by which a man might restructure an estate inheritance in advance of a child reaching the age of majority. The room went absolutely silent. They wanted to know, Elizabeth said, how to take my son from me, and how to ensure that when Nathaniel turned 21, the inheritance he received was the inheritance you had chosen to leave him, not the one his grandfather established for him. Nathaniel's father did not speak. I have answered that letter, his mother said. I have also spoken to Judge Alderman, who was a close friend of your father's, and who has known Nathaniel since he was born. I have spoken to Mr. Carver at the Richmond firm of Carver and Hall, who has agreed to represent the interests of the estate trust. And I have written to your brother in Boston, who I believe will be as interested as I am to understand how the family holdings in which he holds a partial stake have been managed these past 11 months. A long silence. So, she said, I am not asking you to answer to me. I am telling you that there are people now, honest people of standing in this community and in this family, who know what I know. And I am offering you a choice, William. One choice because I believe that even now you are capable of making a right one, and because your son is going to grow up in this house, and he is going to learn from watching his parents what kind of person a person can choose to be. She paused. You can choose to contest this, to proceed with whatever plan that Richmond attorney was hired to execute. And if you do, I will ensure that every document in this folder becomes part of a public proceeding, and that the outcome of that proceeding is the one that the evidence supports. She paused again. Or you can sit down, and we can speak plainly about what happens next, for the sake of this estate, and for the sake of your son. A very long silence, then the sound of a chair being pulled out. Nathaniel did not know how long he stood in the hallway. Long enough for the afternoon light to shift. Long enough for the sound of conversation inside to go from sharp and hard to something quieter. Something that still had tension in it, but had lost some of its edge. Hannah found him there eventually. She stood beside him for a moment without speaking. Then she said quietly, Your mother said you were in the library. I came down, he said. She was quiet again. Then, she knew he'd be listening. That's why she left the door like that. Nathaniel looked at her. Hannah kept her eyes forward. Your mama plans for things, she said. Planned for most everything in that room right now, I'd say. Planned for it for quite some time. Did you know, he said, about the money from my trust? About what he did? Hannah was quiet for a moment that went just slightly too long. Hannah, he said, I knew your mama was worried, she said carefully. I knew she was going through papers at night that she hadn't been through before. I knew she was writing letters and not saying who they were to. She paused. I didn't know the whole of it, but I knew it was something she was fixing, because that's what she does. She glanced at him for the first time. Your mama is the kind of woman who finds out what's broken and fixes it before anyone else knows it was broken in the first place. It's not a small thing what she does. Most people never see it. I see it, Nathaniel said. I know you do, she said. That's why she let you stay in that hallway. Dinner that evening was a strange, quiet thing. Caroline Whitmore did not appear. She remained in her rooms in the East Wing, or rather Nathaniel supposed she remained in the suite that had been prepared for a guest of the house, which was not the East Wing after all, because his mother had met the housekeeper before lunch and quietly redirected the arrangements to a smaller guest room on the second floor, one that was comfortable and entirely appropriate and nowhere near the family quarters. No one commented on this. His father sat at the head of the table. His mother sat at the other end. Nathaniel sat between them, and the three of them ate a meal that cook had prepared good food, as it always was, the kind of meal that would have been occasion for conversation and complaint, and the easy back and forth of a family at ease with itself, and no one said very much. His father asked about his studies. "Well enough," Nathaniel said. "Your tutor is in Fredericksburg this week, back Monday." His father nodded. He cut his meat. He seemed smaller somehow than Nathaniel remembered. Not in any physical sense, just smaller. As though something that had been propping him up from the inside had quietly deflated, and now the architecture of him was visible, and it was less impressive than it had looked with all the air in it. After a while, William said, not looking up from his plate, "Your mother tells me the tobacco yield was strong this summer." "It was," Nathaniel said. His father nodded again, pushed something around his plate. "She managed things well," he said. It was said to no one in particular, to the table perhaps, as though he were commenting on the weather. But it was said. His mother did not look up from her plate. "The estate required it," she said. That night, Nathaniel sat on the floor of his room, with the piece of ledger paper from his desk drawer spread open on the rug in front of him. 143 marks. He looked at them for a long time. He was 13 years old, and he understood things he hadn't understood that morning. Not because someone had explained them, though someone had, but because he'd stood in a hallway and heard his mother speak to his father with the quiet, irrefutable authority of a woman who had spent 5 months preparing for exactly this conversation, and something in that had rearranged something in him. He'd always known his mother was capable. He hadn't known until today exactly what that meant. He folded the ledger paper carefully. He put it back in the drawer. Then he opened his workbook to the geometry problems he hadn't finished, and he worked through them until the lamp oil ran low, and when it sputtered, he closed the book and sat in the near dark and thought about the sound of his father's voice at dinner. She managed things well, and the specific considered silence his mother had answered it with. She hadn't accepted the acknowledgement. She hadn't dismissed it. She had simply declined to perform gratitude for being recognized for something she had done plainly because it needed doing. He thought about that for a long time. He was not yet sure what kind of man he intended to be. He was 13, and that question had many years of evidence still ahead of it. But he thought, lying on his back in the near dark, that he had just watched something that mattered, something he was going to carry. He didn't know yet what to call it. He fell asleep with the drawer still half open, and the ledger paper folded inside it, and the summer heat pressing in from the window, like something that had decided to stay. 2 days later, Caroline Whitmore left Brooks Estate. She did not make a scene about it. She had her luggage brought to the front drive in the early morning before the household was fully awake, and she stood beside the carriage while her trunk was loaded, and she looked at the front of the house one more time. Nathaniel saw her from the upstairs window. He watched her look at the house, that same considering look she'd had when she arrived, calculating, measuring, and he watched her face as something in the calculation resolved. She turned away. She said something to the driver. She stepped up into the carriage without waiting for a hand. She didn't look back. He didn't know exactly what his mother had said to her. He suspected he would never know the whole of it. But later that week, Hannah said in the particular way Hannah said things, which was as though she were commenting on nothing in particular, while meaning everything, that Miss Whitmore had been in some ways as much a consequence of William Brooks's decisions as anyone else in the house, and that Elizabeth Brooks had told her so plainly and without cruelty, and had given her the name of a family in Richmond who needed a governess and were good people who would treat her fairly. "Your mama could have made it hard for her," Hannah said. "She didn't." "Why not?" Nathaniel asked. Hannah gave him a look he'd seen before on her face, the look of someone who is deciding whether the person they're talking to is ready for the real answer. "Because it wasn't her the one who wronged your mama," she said. "Not mostly. Your mama knows the difference between where the wrong came from and where it landed." She paused. "She always has." The summer went on. His father stayed. He stayed in the way that a man stays when the geography of a place is the same as before, but the architecture of power within it has been entirely rearranged, and everyone present knows it, even if no one says so directly. He rose in the mornings. He appeared at meals. He walked the fields occasionally the way he had always done, except that now the foreman who met him did so with a particular quality of formal courtesy that had not been there before, the kind of courtesy that people offer when they have recently learned exactly where the authority in a situation actually resides. He did not attempt to access the estate accounts. He did not send any further letters to attorneys in Richmond. He sat some evenings on the east porch with a glass of something, and he looked out at the tobacco fields in the long summer evening light, and Nathaniel passing through. Sometimes looked at him and thought about the difference between a man who possesses something and a man who has simply not yet found a reason to leave it. He wasn't sure yet which one his father was. I wasn't sure his father knew either. In August, the estate manager called a full quarterly meeting of the Brooks Property Council, the group of men who oversaw the various holdings, the tenant farms, the commercial contracts with the Richmond buyers, the arrangement with the mill. His mother had established this council in June in her husband's absence, with Judge Alderman's endorsement and the agreement of the 3 senior managers who'd worked the Brooks properties for over a decade. It was legally and practically a sound arrangement. It was also a precise and deliberate one. His father attended the meeting. He sat at the table in the estate meeting room, and he listened, and he did not speak, except to answer a direct question once about the terms of a contract that predated Elizabeth's management. When he answered, he was correct, and he answered crisply, and then he went back to listening. Nathaniel attended the meeting too. I was there at his mother's explicit invitation. She had told him the night before that there was no particular reason a 13-year-old who would one day be responsible for all of this should not begin to understand how it worked. She had said it simply, without drama, the way she said most things. He sat beside her. He listened. He watched his father at the other end of the table, and he watched his mother at the head of it. Not because anyone had placed her there, but because she was the one the managers turned to when they had a question, the one they waited for when there was a decision to be made, the one the room organized itself around in the way rooms do around people who have earned that particular gravity. He watched his father notice this, and he watched something move through his father's face, not anger, not quite. Something older than anger. Something that might, in a different man, have eventually become something like honesty. He didn't know yet if his father was a different enough man for that. He was 13. He had time to find out. The meeting concluded. His mother thanked the managers for their time. She walked Nathaniel back to the house through the long summer heat, and they walked in easy quiet for a while, the kind of quiet that doesn't need filling. Then Nathaniel said, "You knew it would go like that." "I hoped," his mother said. "You planned for it to go like that," he said. The council. Having Judge Alderman support it. Making sure the managers already trusted your management before anyone could question it. His mother glanced at him with something in her eyes that might have been the beginning of a smile. "You're paying attention," she said. "You told me to." "I did," she said. She was quiet for a moment. "Your grandfather used to say that the person who holds a thing is not always the person who owns it. He meant land mostly. He was a practical man." She paused. "But I've come to think it applies to most things worth having." Nathaniel thought about that. "What do we hold?" he asked. "What's ours really, after all of this?" His mother looked at him. "Everything worth keeping," she said. "The rest was just furniture." They went inside. The summer heat pressed on, and Brooks Estate stood exactly where it had always stood. Same walls, same fields, same long drive that curved up to the front steps. Except that inside it, something had quietly shifted, and everyone who lived there felt it, and no one said so directly because some changes don't announce themselves. They simply become very gradually the way things are. The morning after, Caroline Whitmore left Brooks Estate felt like a house that had been holding its breath for 2 days and had only just remembered how to exhale. Nothing was said at breakfast. His father came to the table at his usual hour, sat in his usual chair, and ate with the deliberate, measured manner of a man who had decided that dignity at this particular juncture was the only currency he had left that hadn't been spent. His mother poured her coffee. She asked Nathaniel about his tutor's return date. Nathaniel said Monday, and she nodded, and that was the whole of it. But something had changed in the house. Not loudly, not in any way that a stranger walking in would have noticed. But Nathaniel felt it the way you feel a shift in weather before the clouds arrive. Something in the pressure of the air, something in the way the staff moved through rooms, something in the way his father's eyes tracked his mother across a room without her seeming to notice, and without him seeming to mean for it to show. I was watching her the way a man watches something he has underestimated. Nathaniel noticed that too. He filed it away, the way he was learning to file things quietly, and without comment, in some interior ledger that was growing more detailed by the day. His tutor came back on Monday as promised. Mr. Aldous Pemberton was a slight, precise man in his mid-40s who had been engaged to educate Nathaniel 2 years prior, and who took his work seriously in the specific, relentless way of people who believe that the mind of a child is a field that, properly cultivated, produces something extraordinary, and that anything less than proper cultivation is a kind of moral failure. He had opinions about Latin. Strong opinions. He had even stronger ones about mathematics, and the strongest of all about what he called the discipline of accurate observation, by which he meant the practice of looking at a thing exactly as it was, without flinching, without editorializing, and then writing down precisely what you'd seen. It was the last of these that Nathaniel had always liked best, and liked more now than he ever had before. Pemberton arrived Monday morning and looked at Nathaniel with the sharp, attentive gaze he used to assess whether a weekend had been spent productively or squandered, and said, "You look different." "I'm the same height," Nathaniel said. "That's not what I mean, and you know it." Pemberton set his bag down on the library table. "What happened while I was gone?" Nathaniel considered the question. He thought about his father's carriage coming up the drive. He thought about Caroline Whitmore's hand in his father's, easy and practiced. He thought about the leather folder on his mother's desk, and the 2 neat stacks of paper, and the sound of his mother's voice through a parlor door left open exactly 1 inch. "My father came home," he said. Pemberton looked at him for a long moment. "I see," he said. Then, without further comment, he opened his bag and produced the week's Latin texts, and they began. But Nathaniel noticed in the days that followed that Pemberton's lessons shifted subtly. The reading selections included more history, not just classical history, but American legal history, property law, the structures by which estates passed from one generation to the next. The mathematics began to include applied problems that looked a great deal like accounting. When Nathaniel mentioned this, Pemberton looked at him over the top of his reading glasses and said, "A young man who will one day manage a significant estate should understand the instruments by which such estates are governed and mismanaged. It seems a more pressing topic than it did 3 weeks ago." Nathaniel said nothing. He did the work. It was Hannah who told him in her oblique side-door manner that there had been a second meeting between his mother and his father. Not the confrontation in the east parlor, but something quieter conducted in the study, late on a Tuesday evening when the house was dark, that had lasted over 2 hours and produced something Nathaniel hadn't expected. "Produced what?" Nathaniel asked. "An agreement," Hannah said, folding a shirt with the unhurried attention she gave everything she touched. "Of sorts. I'm not privy to the particulars. But your mama came out of that study looking like a woman who'd just finished building something she'd been working on for a long time. And your papa came out looking like a man who'd agreed to something he didn't fully understand yet, but would come to understand. Is that good?" Hannah considered this with what seemed like genuine seriousness. "It's honest," she said. "Which is more than most agreements between married people that I've witnessed in my life." Nathaniel thought about that. "She's not going to make him leave," he said. It wasn't quite a question. Hannah kept folding. "That's not my conversation to speak on." "Hannah." "She is not," Hannah said. "Not now. There are reasons for that which have to do with your situation and not with her feelings about your father, of which I suspect she has several, none of which she will discuss with anyone, including herself, for some time to come." She set the folded shirt aside. "What I will tell you is this: your mama made decisions that protect you. Every decision she's made in the past 5 months has been made with that in mind first. Not herself. You." Nathaniel sat with that for a moment. "She should have made some for herself," he said. Hannah looked at him then. Really looked at him with something in her eyes that was not quite surprise, but was close to it. "Yes," she said quietly. "She should have. And you remember that you thought so when you're older." September came in with a dry heat that didn't break until the third week of the month, and with it came visitors. The first was Robert Alderman, Judge Alderman's son, a man of 35, who managed a law practice in Richmond, and who arrived at Brooks Estate on a Thursday morning with a leather satchel and the particular professional pleasantness of a man who has been asked to deliver news that is neither entirely good nor entirely bad, but is entirely necessary. He met with both of Nathaniel's parents together. Nathaniel was not in the hallway this time. He was in the library genuinely, because Pemberton had given him a translation exercise that required his full concentration, and because this time his mother had told him directly, "You will not need to listen at doors today, Nathaniel. I will tell you what is decided." She did tell him. That evening, she came to his room after supper and sat in the chair near his desk, the straight-backed one she'd sat in when she helped him with early reading lessons years ago, and she told him plainly, and without softening the shape of what had been agreed, his father would retain his position as the formal head of the Brooks estate. This was a practical concession to the legal and social realities of 1818. Virginia and his mother made no apology for it, and no pretense that it was otherwise. But the estate's financial management, the accounts, the trust, the crop contracts, the bank arrangements would pass to a formal oversight council with Robert Alderman's firm, providing legal review on a quarterly basis. Every significant transaction would require documented approval from Elizabeth Brooks as co-trustee of the estate. The trust established for Nathaniel would be restructured under terms that his father could not alter unilaterally. "He agreed to this?" Nathaniel asked. "He agreed," his mother said. "Why?" She was quiet for a moment. "Because the alternative was worse. For him, for the family name, for the standing he still values in this county." She paused. "And because Robert Alderman had a conversation with him privately about the legal exposure that existed if the Richmond attorney's efforts had been carried forward and subsequently examined. Your father is many things. He is not entirely without self-preservation." Nathaniel thought about this. "So he did it to protect himself," he said, "not because it was right." "Yes," his mother said. She didn't try to reframe it. He appreciated that. "Is that enough?" he asked. She looked at him steadily. "For now," she said. "Whether it becomes more than that over time is something your father will have to answer for himself. I cannot answer it for him. No one can." She paused. "What I can tell you is that the outcome for you for this estate is sound, and that I would make the same decisions again, knowing everything I know now." "Even knowing what he did?" Nathaniel asked. "With the trust, with the money." His mother was very still for a moment. "Especially then," she said. The second visitor came 10 days later, and he was not expected. Thomas Whitmore, Caroline's elder, 28 years old, out of a family from the Northern Neck, with connections enough to make an unexpected visit. Feel like a statement arrived at Brooks Estate late on a Sunday afternoon, when the family was in from the fields and the household had settled into its quiet evening rhythm. He was shown to the front parlor. Nathaniel's father went in first alone. Nathaniel was at the top of the main stairs when he heard the voices rise, not quite shouting, but loud enough to carry, and he recognized his father's voice, and a voice he didn't know, and recognized the particular register of two men arguing about something that was really about pride and had nothing to do with the stated subject. The stated subject, he learned later, was money. Thomas Whitmore had accompanied his sister on the journey from Philadelphia. He had been told by his sister that the arrangement with William Brooks had been one thing. What it had turned out to be was another. He had opinions about the difference. He had expressed these opinions in a letter first. When the letter received a response he found unsatisfactory, he had driven to Brooks Estate to express them in person. Hannah told him this afterward. She'd heard most of it not because she was listening at doors, but because, as she pointed out with dignity, she had been carrying linens down the hall, and the front parlor door had not been closed with any particular thoroughness. "Was it bad?" Nathaniel asked. "Your papa held himself together," Hannah said, which he understood meant it was bad, and the holding together was itself noteworthy. "Mr. Whitmore has a temper. He also has a point which made the temper harder to argue with." She paused. Your mama went in after about 15 minutes. Nathaniel straightened. She went in? She did. What happened? Hannah paused in the way that meant she was deciding how much to give him. Mr. Whitmore said some things that weren't entirely fair to her situation, she said carefully. He made a suggestion about what kind of household this was and what kind of oversight had been exercised over his sister's situation. Your mama listened to it. Then she said, and I'm telling you what I heard, she said. Mr. Whitmore, I did not invite your sister here. I did not make promises to your sister. I did not deceive your sister about the nature of this household or what she would find in it. The person who did those things is standing beside you, and I suggest your next conversation be with him, because your quarrel is not with me. Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. And then, he said. And then, Hannah said. Mr. Whitmore looked at her for a long time, and he looked at your papa, and he said, and this is what struck me, he said, ma'am, I owe you an apology. And he gave one, a real one. She paused. And then he and your father had a very different kind of conversation. Quieter. The kind you have when the anger's out and what's left is just the actual problem. What was the actual problem? Money, Hannah said, which it usually is. Nathaniel thought about what his mother had said in that parlor. He thought about it for several days, turning it over, examining it from different angles, the way Pemberton had taught him to examine a text he didn't immediately understand, not looking for what he wanted it to say, but for what it actually said. Your quarrel is not with me. It was such a simple thing to say. Such a direct, unadorned statement. And it had cut through everything, the bluster, the misplaced anger, the misdirected grievance, and pointed plainly at the place the problem actually lived. He started to understand that this was what his mother did. Not just in that parlor, but as a habit of mind, as a practice. She looked at the actual shape of a thing, not the shape it presented, not the shape she might prefer, but the actual shape, and she responded to that. Not to what was easier, or more comfortable, or more flattering to herself. She responded to what was real. He wanted to be able to do that. I didn't know yet if he could. He was 13, and honesty of that particular caliber was not something you could decide to have. It was something you built slowly over a long time by making choices, small ones and large ones, and sometimes getting them wrong and doing it again. But he wanted to. He went back to his translation, and he worked it through to the end. October brought the cooler air that Virginia summers eventually grudgingly surrendered to, and with it came a shift in the estate's rhythms. The tobacco harvest completing, the commercial contracts being settled, the accounts closed for the season, and the new ones opened. His mother was in the study every night that month. He could see the light under the door when he passed in the hallway on the way to his room. Sometimes it was still burning when he woke in the night for water. He started without making a particular decision to do so, leaving a covered plate from supper outside the study door on the nights she didn't come to the table. He didn't say anything about it. She didn't say anything about it either. But the plate was always empty in the morning. One evening in mid-October, he knocked before he fully decided to knock, and she called him in, and he came in and sat in the chair across from the desk and didn't say anything for a moment. Just looked at the desk, covered in its familiar landscape of paper and ink and ledger books, and she looked at him with the patient present attention she'd always given him, and he said, "He's going to leave eventually, isn't he?" It was not a question exactly. It was more like a thing he'd been carrying for a while and had decided to set down between them rather than keep carrying. His mother looked at him for a long moment. "I don't know," she said. "I think it is possible. I think it may even be likely." She paused. "Is that what you're afraid of? Or is it something else?" He thought about it honestly. "I'm not sure I'm afraid of it," he said. "That might be the thing I'm most afraid of, that I'm not afraid of it." His mother was quiet. "It means something about me," he said, "that I'm not afraid of him leaving." "It means," his mother said carefully, "that you have been watching closely for several months, and you have formed an accurate assessment. That is not the same as not loving your father. It is possible to love a person and to see them clearly at the same time. Most people find it very difficult. You are managing it at 13. She paused. "That's not nothing, Nathaniel." He looked at the desk, at the ledger books, at the inkwell that was always nearly empty and always refilled before morning. "Does it get easier?" he asked. "Seeing things clearly. Does it get less? Does it stop feeling like—" He stopped. "Like something being taken away," she said. "Yes." She was quiet for a while, long enough that the lamplight shifted some small adjustment to the flame, and the shadows in the room moved slightly. "No," she said finally. "I don't think it does. I think it costs every time. The difference is that over time, you decide the cost is worth paying. Because the alternative, not seeing or choosing not to look, costs more. It costs you the accuracy of your understanding of the world, which is the only real tool you ever have." She paused. "So you pay the smaller price, and you keep looking." Nathaniel sat with that. "All right," he said. He got up. He went to the door. He paused with his hand on the frame and turned back and said, "You should eat supper at the table, even when you're in the middle of something." His mother looked at him. "You're probably right," she said. "I know I'm right," he said. "Pemberton says that about sitting posture, and it applies equally to meals." Something moved through his mother's face, something brief and warm and entirely unguarded here, and gone in a moment, but he saw it. "Good night, Nathaniel," she said. "Good night, Mama," he said. He pulled the door closed behind him and stood in the hall for a moment in the dark, and then went to bed. The thing about a house that has been through something, a real something. Not a small disagreement or a temporary difficulty, but an actual fracturing, is that the people in it carry the shape of what happened in their bodies long after the event itself is over. You can see it in the way they move through rooms that used to hold something different. You can hear it in the quality of silences at a table where once there was a particular kind of easy noise. Nathaniel felt this in Brooks Estate through the fall of 1818. His father was present. He rose and ate and walked the property and attended the council meeting in November. Attended it quietly, answered questions when asked, did not volunteer anything, and he was there, recognizably there. And yet somehow the quality of his presence had changed in a way that was difficult to put precise language to. He took up less room. Not because he had shrunk, but because he no longer operated as though the space was his by inherent right. He moved through it more carefully, and that carefulness was either the beginning of something real or the performance of something strategic, and Nathaniel had not yet determined which. I was beginning to understand that some questions take a long time to resolve, that you could hold a question open live alongside it, keep watching, and eventually the evidence would accumulate into something like an answer. Or it wouldn't, and you'd learn something from that too. One evening, he found his father in the east porch, the way he had found him before, with his glass and the long look out at the fields. The evening light was thin and golden. Now fall light, the kind that makes everything it touches look like something you're remembering, rather than something you're seeing. Nathaniel came and stood beside him, not quite next to him, and they were both quiet for a while. His father said eventually, "You know what I did." Nathaniel didn't look at him. "Yes, sir." "Your mother told you." "Some. I heard some myself." Silence. "She was right to," his father said. "It sounded like it cost him something." "About most of it." He was quiet again. "I'd like to tell you it was more complicated than it appears. I expect most of it wasn't." Nathaniel said nothing. He was thinking about what his mother had said, that you could love a person and see them clearly at the same time. I was trying to do both of those things at once. It was, as she'd indicated, difficult. "What do you want me to say?" Nathaniel asked. His father looked at him then. Looked at him with something that was not quite surprise, more like recognition, as though he'd expected a younger version of his son, and had encountered something he hadn't quite prepared for. I don't know, he said. "That's honest," Nathaniel said. His father looked at the fields for a moment. "I suppose it is," he said. "Then, you're going to be better at this than I was. At all of it. The estate. The—" He paused, gestured vaguely. "The being a person." He said it simply without performance, which was what made it land. Nathaniel didn't know what to do with that. He stood with it for a moment. "I don't know about that," he said. I do, his father said. I've had enough time lately to look at things clearly. Your mother's habit. It turns out it's uncomfortable even as a spectator. He paused. You have it too. You always did. I just didn't. I wasn't paying the right kind of attention. Nathaniel looked at the fields. The long rows, the empty stalks, the harvest done. You could start, he said, paying attention. His father was quiet for a long time. Yes, he said. I suppose I could. They stood there a while longer. Neither of them said much. But it was a different kind of silence than the ones that had filled the house for the past months. Not comfortable exactly, but not dishonest either. Not the silence of things avoided, but the silence of things that had been said and were now settling. Eventually, the light gave out entirely, and the evening came, and Nathaniel went inside. In November, a letter arrived from William's brother in Boston, the one Elizabeth had written to months earlier, the one who held a partial stake in the Brooks land holdings. His name was Edward Brooks. He was 45, a merchant, a practical and methodical man who had built his portion of the family's wealth through patience and compound interest and a thorough disinclination to make decisions based on emotion. He was also, by every account Nathaniel had ever heard, the one person in the family his father had always been faintly competitive with and had never quite admitted it. The letter was addressed to both of his parents. His mother read it first, then passed it to his father, and Nathaniel watched his father's face as he read. He watched his father's jaw tighten, then release, then tighten again. He's coming, his father said. In December, his mother said, for the winter quarter review. His father set the letter down. He's coming to see what happened. He's coming, his mother said, because he is a stakeholder in this property, and I informed him, as I was obligated to, of the financial irregularities that affected accounts in which he has an interest. He is coming to satisfy himself that those irregularities have been corrected and that the estate is soundly managed. She paused. He is also coming, I suspect, because he is your brother, and he wants to see for himself that things are, that you are all right. His father was quiet for a moment. Did you have to write to him? He said. Yes, his mother said. Elizabeth. Yes, she said again. I did. Because not writing to him would have meant concealing from a partial owner of this property the financial conduct that had affected his interests. And I will not conceal things. Not from him. Not from the council. Not from anyone who has a right to know. She paused. That is not the way I choose to manage anything. His father picked up the letter again, looked at it. He's going to be, he started. I expect he will have things to say, his mother said. You will have to hear them. I am sorry that it will be difficult. She paused, and her voice was entirely even when she said the next part, and it was genuine. He could hear it was genuine. I am sorry that things arrived at a place where this is the necessary consequence. I am not sorry for any decision I made, but the difficulty itself, I'm sorry for that. His father looked up at her. Something happened in his face. Something moved through it quickly, and then was gone. Thank you, he said, which was, Nathaniel sensed, not a small thing. His mother nodded once. She went back to her work. December came with frost, and the particular quality of cold that settled into old houses and made the fireplaces the organizing centers of every room. Edward Brooks arrived 2 weeks before Christmas, with luggage enough to suggest he intended to stay through at least New Year's, and the confident, unhurried manner of a man who had traveled from Boston to Virginia because he had decided to do so, and didn't require anyone else to find his arrival convenient. Howe was larger than his brother, broader, more solid, with graying hair at the temples, and the kind of handshake that communicated exactly one thing. This is a man who has been tested and has not been found wanting. He shook Elizabeth's hand first. He shook William's second. He looked at Nathaniel for a long moment, studying him with the direct attention of someone who is used to assessing things quickly and accurately. You're taller than your father was at your age, he said. And you've got your mother's eyes, which is a considerable advantage. He extended his hand. Edward Brooks, I'm your uncle. I apologize it's taken me this long. Nathaniel shook it. It's good to meet you, sir. It'll be better by the end of the week, Edward said. Give me a few days to find my footing in this household, and I generally become more tolerable." He glanced between his brother and his sister-in-law with the quick, comprehensive look of a man who had read his correspondence carefully and now wanted to compare what he'd read against what he was seeing. "Right," he said. "I'd like to see the accounts." "After supper," Elizabeth said. "After supper." Edward agreed. He looked at his brother. "William." "Edward," William said. A whole conversation passed between them in those 4 syllables. Nathaniel couldn't decode all of it, but he could hear enough the weight of it, the history, the specific complicated texture of 2 brothers who have spent decades in an unspoken competition and have recently reached a moment where the competition has produced an outcome that cannot be argued with. His father said, "It's good you're here." His uncle looked at him for a moment. "Yes," he said, "it is." Then he picked up his bag and followed Hannah inside, and the moment passed, and the cold evening settled around the house like a hand-pressed flat. Nathaniel stood on the front steps for a moment in the November air, watching the last light at the edge of the sky, and he thought in the careful cataloging way he was learning to think about things, about everything that had moved through Brooks' estate in the months since that first morning. Every conversation overheard and every one attended. Every document his mother had sorted into 2 neat stacks. Every silence at the dinner table and every word that had finally reluctantly been said. The house was the same house. The people inside it were different, changed by what had happened, some for worse, some he thought for better. His father was changed, though in what direction was still to be determined. His mother was changed in some way that was harder to name. Not weakened, not hardened, but something. More visible, perhaps. More legible because she no longer needed to operate in concealment. More entirely herself because she was no longer managing alone. How was changed? He knew that without being able to fully describe the shape of it yet. He stood on the steps until the cold got past his jacket, and then he went inside, and the door closed behind him, and the firelight reached out into the entryway, and the house, all of it, the estate, the land, the complicated human wreckage and repair of the people who lived inside it, held him as it always had. As it was, he was beginning to understand his. Edward Brooks stayed through Christmas and into the new year, and in that time, he turned Brooks' estate inside out. The way a man turns a coat pocket inside out methodically without apology, looking for what he expected to find and finding more than he'd expected. I went through the accounts with Robert Alderman on the first full day. He asked Nathaniel's mother questions for 3 days after that long, specific, precise questions about decisions she'd made, timing. She'd chosen correspondence she'd sent, and she answered every one of them with the same steady directness she brought to everything. Never defensive, never performing humility. She didn't feel, never embellishing. Just the facts clearly arranged in the order they'd occurred. On the 4th day, Edward went looking for his brother. Nathaniel didn't see that conversation, but he heard his father come in from wherever it had taken place, the south field. Hannah said later, which was as far from the house as you could get on Brooks land. And he heard the particular quality of his father's footsteps in the hallway, and he thought whatever Edward said, it landed. At dinner that night, his father was quiet in a way that was different from his usual quiet. Not the cautious, careful silence of a man managing his presentation. Something rawer than that. Something that looked from across the table like a man who had recently been forced to sit with a version of himself he'd been avoiding and had found the company unpleasant. Nathaniel passed the bread without being asked. His father took it without comment. But he looked at Nathaniel for a moment, really looked the full attention kind, and said, "Thank you, son." 2 words, simple ones. But they landed differently than they would have 6 months ago, because they were said without the expectation that they would be received as a gift. They were just 2 words, honestly meant. Nathaniel said, "Yes, sir," and the meal went on. Edward left in the 2nd week of January after a formal meeting with the estate council that he attended as an observer, and left according to Robert Alderman's report to Elizabeth, satisfied that the management structure was sound and the financial exposure had been properly contained. Before he left, he found Nathaniel in the library. He came in without knocking, which was, Nathaniel was coming to understand simply Edward's way, and he sat in Pemberton's chair, which Pemberton was not using that particular morning, because Pemberton was at the estate office, working through something with the records clerk, and he looked at Nathaniel with the direct, comprehensive gaze Nathaniel had by now gotten used to. "How are you?" Edward said. Nathaniel considered giving the standard answer and rejected it. "Better than I expected to be," he said, "which I think might mean I expected to be worse than I should have." Edward nodded as though this tracked. "You've had a hard year." "The second half of it." "The hard half," Edward agreed. He looked at the book in Nathaniel's hands, noted the title without comment, looked back at Nathaniel. "Your mother is remarkable. I want to be certain you understand that. Not capable remarkable. There's a difference. Capable people do the right thing when it's easy. Remarkable ones do it when they've got every reason not to." Nathaniel said, "I know." "Good," Edward said. "Hold on to knowing that. There'll be years ahead when it might be easier to forget, and you'll want to remember that you knew it young." He paused. "And your father William is—" He stopped, chose his words with unusual care. "William is going to have to decide who he intends to be from here. I can't decide it for him. Your mother can't. You certainly can't. All any of us can do is make the terms of that decision clear." "And you did," Nathaniel said. "I tried," Edward said. He stood, straightened his coat, picked up the hat he'd set on Pemberton's desk. "If you ever need anything at all to do with this estate or not, you write to me in Boston. I'll come." He paused at the door. "And keep doing whatever your mother is teaching you, whether she's doing it on purpose or not. It's the right education." He left. Nathaniel heard him say goodbye to his mother in the hall, and heard his mother's voice answering warmer than he'd heard it in a while. He heard the front door, and then the carriage, and then the sound of wheels going down the long drive and out through the gate. The house was quiet. He picked up his book and went back to the page he'd been on, but he didn't read it for a few minutes. He just sat with what Edward had said. All any of us can do is make the terms of the decision clear. He thought that was probably true of most things. February arrived, and with it came the thing Nathaniel had been half expecting since September. His father announced on an ordinary Tuesday morning, with no particular ceremony, that he would be traveling to Philadelphia. Business matters, he said. The tobacco buyers, the commercial arrangements that needed tending. He expected to be gone some weeks. He would write. He looked at Elizabeth when he said this, and something passed between them. Not a challenge, not a confrontation. Just the honest acknowledgement of two people who have negotiated the terms of their situation and are now wordlessly operating within them. His mother said, "I'll have Thomas prepare the carriage." His father turned to Nathaniel. "You're the man of this house while I'm away," he said. Nathaniel looked at him steadily. "The house has been well managed without that particular arrangement," he said carefully without heat. "I'll do my part. I've been doing my part." His father looked at him for a long moment, and then slowly he nodded. "That's right," he said. "You have been." He paused. "I know it." He left the next morning. Nathaniel stood on the front steps and watched the carriage go. Hannah was behind him. After a while she said, "He might come back." "He might," Nathaniel said. "You don't think he will?" "I think it's not the most important question," Nathaniel said, which was something his mother would have said, and he knew it, and he decided he was all right with that. Spring came in mild that year. The fields woke up the way Virginia fields did, gradually, stubbornly, then all at once. Pemberton increased the pace of the lessons significantly and stopped apologizing for it, which Nathaniel took as evidence that his tutor had decided he was ready for the next level of difficulty, and he pushed himself to prove that assessment correct. He was in the East Field with Thomas in mid-March when the rider came, a man on a brown horse, moving at a pace that was not quite urgent, but was not leisurely either, who slowed as he came up the drive and handed a letter to the boy who met him at the gate. The letter was addressed to Elizabeth Brooks, and it bore a return address in Philadelphia, and it had the look of something that had been written with some care. His mother read it in the study. Nathaniel waited. She came out after 20 minutes. "Your father has had a business reversal," she said. Her voice was level, but he heard the thing underneath it. "He is well. Not ill, not injured. But the Philadelphia venture did not resolve as he had hoped. He has asked whether he might return." Nathaniel looked at her. "He asked," he said. "He didn't just say he was coming." "No," his mother said. "He asked." They were both quiet for a moment. "What will you tell him?" Nathaniel said. She looked at him long, measuring the way she looked at problems she was working through, rather than ones she'd already solved. "What do you think I should tell him?" she said. And he understood that she was asking genuinely, not to deflect or to hand the responsibility to a 14-year-old who shouldn't have to carry it, but because she genuinely wanted to hear what he thought. "I thought about it." He thought about the front steps and his father's carriage arriving in the summer heat. He thought about the parlor door left open an inch. He thought about, "You've let your hair get long, and she managed things well, and I suppose I could." "And thank you, son," each said in a different voice, each a different version of the man, some of them smaller and some larger than Nathaniel had been expecting. "Tell him he can come back," Nathaniel said. "But tell him the terms are the same as when he left. They don't change just because things got harder for him somewhere else." His mother looked at him for a long moment. "Yes," she said quietly. "That's right." She went back into the study to write her response, and Nathaniel went back to the east field, and the mild spring went on around them, and Brooks Estate held its shape. His father returned in April. How was quieter than he'd been in February. More deliberate in how he moved through the house, more careful about how he occupied space that wasn't entirely his. He attended the spring council meeting and said more than he had in the winter. One, practical things, accurate things, observations about the tobacco market and the commercial contracts that came from genuine knowledge and were genuinely useful. The managers received them without the wariness they'd had before, not with warmth exactly, but with the professional respect that people offer when someone has demonstrated they are going to try to do the actual work. Nathaniel watched this. He watched his father sit through a correction from Robert Alderman about a contract term without pushing back, accepting the correction cleanly, and moving on. He watched him ask his mother a question about the spring accounts. Would it make sense to, with the cadence of a man asking a peer, not instructing a subordinate? He watched Elizabeth answer the question, and he watched his father listen. I wasn't sure what his father was becoming. He thought it was too early to say. But he thought it was possible, not certain, not promised, but possible, that what his father was becoming was someone who had made enough mistakes to finally have specific hard-won information about the cost of them. That wasn't nothing. Summer returned. Nathaniel turned 14 in June, and Pemberton gave him as a birthday acknowledgement a copy of Plutarch's Lives with a note inside the front cover that read, "For the young man who has the good sense to learn from the examples of those who did it wrong before they got it right." He read it that summer in the evenings on the east porch in the long light. His father sometimes sat on the east porch too. They didn't always talk. Sometimes they just sat. But the silence between them was different now, not avoidant, not charged. Just two people existing in the same space with the specific careful regard of people who are still figuring out what they are to each other, who have decided that figuring it out is worth the effort. One evening his father said out of nowhere, "Do you know what I was doing at your age?" "No, sir," Nathaniel said. "Getting into trouble in the exact way your grandfather told me not to," his father said. "He had a list. I worked through it systematically." He paused. "I thought at the time it was independence. I understand now it was impatience. I couldn't stand waiting to be in charge of anything. So I kept doing things to prove I could do them without stopping to ask whether doing them was right." Nathaniel said nothing. Waited. "The problem," his father said, "is that I never really stopped. I just got older, and the things I did got larger, and the consequences got harder to contain." He looked at the fields. "Your mother contained them anyway." "She did," Nathaniel said. "She always could have managed all of this without me," his father said. "She knew it. I knew it. I think in some part I didn't want to look at. I think I knew it before we married." He paused. "I chose not to look at it." "Why?" Nathaniel asked. His father turned to look at him. It was the direct, full-attention look, the one Nathaniel had been waiting for since the day his father stepped off the carriage and hadn't given it, and there it was now, a year late and hard-won, and more real for all of that. Because, his father said, "I was afraid of what I'd see." Nathaniel looked at him. "And now," he said. "Now I've seen it," his father said simply. "I'm still afraid. But the fear doesn't arrange my decisions the way it used to." He paused. "That's the most honest thing I can tell you." It was. Nathaniel could hear it. It was an honest thing said by a man who was still learning how to say honest things, which was different from a man who said them naturally, but it was not nothing. "Thank you for telling me," Nathaniel said. His father nodded. They went back to their separate silences, and the evening light moved through the tobacco rows, and the house settled around them. The real reckoning came in July. Nathaniel had not expected it. Nobody had exactly, though his mother had thought something like it was possible, had said so once carefully to Robert Alderman in a conversation. Nathaniel was present for, and was not sure he was meant to have heard. She had said, "There are things William has not resolved yet. They will resolve themselves one way or another. I am hoping for one way." The thing that forced resolution was a letter. It came from Richmond, from a different law firm than the one that had written the inquiry about guardianship the previous summer. This firm wrote on behalf of a creditor, a man in Philadelphia named Gerald Holt, who had lent William Brooks a considerable sum of money during the February venture on terms that William had signed personally, not against estate holdings, but against his own name, and who was now calling the debt due. The sum was significant. Significant enough that William could not meet it personally without touching estate accounts. Touching estate accounts required council authorization. Council authorization required Elizabeth's agreement. Elizabeth received the notice the same day William did. She read it. She brought it to the study meeting, a small one, just herself, Robert Alderman, and the senior estate manager Thomas Carver, and she put it on the table and said, "We need to discuss this." Nathaniel was not in that meeting. He knew it was happening. He sat in the library and tried to read Plutarch, and succeeded only partially. The rest of his attention pointed like a compass needle toward the closed study door at the other end of the hall. He heard his father's voice at one point raised, then deliberately brought back down. Heard Alderman's steady professional cadence. Heard his mother say something short and clear, 2 sentences, the words indistinct through the door, but the tone unmistakable. "This is the situation, here are the options, we will decide." The meeting lasted nearly 2 hours. When the study door opened, his father came out first. He walked down the hall without looking up, passed the library doorway without stopping, went toward the east wing. Robert Alderman came out second. He paused at the library doorway. Nathaniel and gave him a single nod that communicated, "It's done. It's handled. You don't need to worry." Then he went to collect his coat and hat. His mother came out last. She looked tired. Not defeated. She never looked defeated. He was beginning to understand that defeat simply wasn't a gear she operated in, but tired in the particular way of someone who has just spent 2 hours doing something that required every part of them to be present and accurate and unflinching, and who is now feeling the full weight of that. She saw Nathaniel in the doorway. She came and stood across from him, and he looked at her and said, "What happened?" "The debt will be settled," she said, "from estate accounts under terms that your father has agreed to formally, and in writing terms that extend the repayment of what he borrowed against his own personal accounts over the next 3 years from his portion of the estate's annual returns. He will not have access to any estate capital beyond that allotment until the amount is repaid in full." Nathaniel absorbed this. "He agreed to that," he said. "He did." She paused. "It took some time. Did he fight it?" She looked at him steadily. "He tried to argue for different terms," she said. "Robert explained why different terms were not available. Your father pushed. Robert held. And then—" She stopped, seemed to be deciding something. "And then your father stopped pushing. He sat back. He looked at the papers for a long time. And then he said, 'Tell me where to sign.'" Nathaniel was quiet. "Was it?" he started. "It was hard," his mother said, answering the question he hadn't quite finished. "For him, it was very hard. Harder than the fall, I think. Because this time he had to choose it clearly. He wasn't cornered into it. He could have contested it, the terms, the structure, the authority of the council. He has legal standing to contest it. He chose not to. Why? Nathaniel said. His mother looked at him for a moment. I think, she said, because he is trying. I cannot tell you whether he will keep trying. I cannot promise you that. But I think today was the first time he made a decision that cost him something real and made it anyway because it was right. She paused. I could be wrong. You're usually not, Nathaniel said. Something moved through her face. I have been wrong before, she said. About important things. I try to remember that. He nodded. They stood in the hallway for a moment, in the particular quiet of a day that had required a great deal of everyone in the house and was now finally slowly beginning to rest. Mama, he said. Edward said you were remarkable, he said. I should have said it too, before now. She looked at him. The tiredness was still there, but something else moved through it, something brief and warm and entirely honest. You've been saying it, she said. In everything you've done this year, I don't need the word. I know, he said, but I wanted to say it anyway. She reached out and pressed her hand briefly against the side of his face, the way she had when he was much smaller, when she would check for fever or cold, or just sometimes to touch him because he was hers and she was glad of it. Then she dropped her hand and straightened. I'm going to rest before supper, she said. Good, he said. She went. He stood in the hallway for another moment, then went back to Plutarch, and this time he actually read it. The summer moved on. His father came to the table differently after the July meeting. Not transformed, he was too old and too fixed in certain habits for transformation, and Nathaniel had enough honesty in him by now to know better than to expect it. But different, more attentive, more careful with the space. He occupied the words, he chose the way he received information that ran counter to what he wanted to hear. He started asking Nathaniel questions. Not testing questions or rhetorical ones, but genuine ones. What did Pemberton say about this? What did you notice in the Southfield today? What does your mother do when she finds an error in the accounts? He asked like a man trying to learn something he should have learned a long time ago and had decided it wasn't too late to start. Nathaniel answered. Honestly, straightforwardly, the way his mother had taught him by example. Some evenings. The three of them were on the east porch together. His mother with whatever correspondence needed attention. His father with whatever he was working through, Nathaniel with Plutarch, or with Pemberton's latest assignment. And the three of them existed in the same space in a way that wasn't easy, not exactly, but was real. Not performed. Not maintained out of obligation alone. Real in the way that things made of actual material are real, even when the material has been stressed and bent and is not quite the shape it was originally. It was, Nathaniel thought, more than he'd expected. And maybe that was enough. Maybe enough was not the same as everything, but it was not nothing, and he was learning to hold those two things at once. The thing that was not everything and the thing that was not nothing, without tipping too far toward either. He was 14. He had time to practice. In August, something happened that none of them had anticipated, and it came not from his father, or from Philadelphia, or from any of the complicated human machinery of the past year, but from the land itself. A fire started in the Southfield. It began in the early morning, before the house was properly awake. A dry summer, a dry field. Some combination of heat and chance that nobody ever fully explained, and by the time Thomas got to Elizabeth's window and knocked hard enough to wake her, there was already a glow on the horizon that Nathaniel, lying awake in his room for no reason he could name, had been looking at for several minutes, not yet understanding what it was. He understood when he heard Thomas's voice, and his mother's response, and the sudden movement of the house going from still to fully awake. He was dressed and down the stairs in minutes. His father was already in the hall. He was moving fast, the kind of fast that Nathaniel had never seen from him, decisive and physical, and stripped of all the complicated social overlay, just a man who saw a problem and went directly at it. The well teams, his father said to Thomas, not asking telling. South line first. Don't let it get to the fallow ground. Yes, sir, Thomas said and went. His father looked at Nathaniel. Stay close to the house, he said. I can help. Stay close to the house, his father said. Not harshly, but with an authority that was entirely different from his old authority. Not the authority of a man asserting rank, but the authority of a man who had assessed the situation and was certain about one part of it. I need to know you're safe. That's the thing I need right now. Can you give me that? Nathaniel looked at him. Yes, sir, he said. His father gripped his shoulder once, brief hard. The grip of a man saying something he didn't have words for, and then went out into the dark. The fire took a quarter of the south field and stopped at the fire break the well teams managed to hold. It was bad. Not catastrophic, not the kind of loss that would break a season. Though it would hurt it, but bad enough that the acrid smell of it hung over the estate for 3 days afterward, and the loss had to be accounted for, and the council notified, and letters sent to the Richmond buyers, adjusting the quantities on the fall contracts. His mother handled every piece of the aftermath with the same composed precision she brought to everything. She walked the burned ground herself with Thomas and the senior field manager, and she looked at what was lost without flinching and asked the questions she needed to ask. And when she came back to the house, she sat down at the desk and she did the math, and then she told everyone what the numbers were. His father had been in the field for most of the night and into the morning. When he came back to the house, face-blackened clothes, ruined, moving with the careful stiffness of a man who has been physically running and hauling and doing things with his body for 8 hours. He sat down at the kitchen table, and Hannah put a cup of coffee in front of him, and he drank it without a word. After a while, Nathaniel's mother came in from the study. She sat across from his father at the kitchen table. She looked at him. He looked at her. The south line held, she said. Thomas's crew, he said. They worked through it. You were with them, she said. Not a question. For what it was worth, he said. She looked at him for a moment. It was worth something, she said, simply, without embellishment. His father looked down at the coffee cup. I should have been here, he said. Last summer, all of it. I should have been here. The kitchen was quiet. The morning light came in at the window. Outside, somewhere in the yard, one of the stable boys was talking to a horse low and easy. Yes, his mother said. You should have. She paused. You're here now. His father didn't say anything. That doesn't erase the other, she said. I'm not offering you that, but it is a fact. You're here now, and you worked through the night, and the south line held. She paused. We start from what's true. Nathaniel, standing in the kitchen doorway, heard this. He did not announce himself. He just stood and listened, and watched his parents sit at the kitchen table in the morning light, in the smell of smoke and coffee, in the particular exhausted honesty of people who have been through a long night and come out the other side of it still in the same house. And he thought with all the clarity of 14 years, and one very long, very hard year of watching and listening and learning to see things as they were, that this was what his mother had meant. When she said we start from what's true, she wasn't offering forgiveness like a gift. She was describing the only place from which anything worth building could actually begin. You start from what's true. Everything else comes from there. I went back to his room, and he picked up Plutarch, and he read until the smell of breakfast came up from the kitchen, and then he went down and joined his family at the table, and outside the south field was still black and would need months to recover, and the summer heat was already building again, and Brooks Estate was still standing. And all of them in their different ways were still in it. The south field recovered slowly. The way things that have been genuinely damaged always do, not in a rush, not all at once, but in small, stubborn increments that required patience and attention, and the willingness to keep showing up even when the progress wasn't visible yet. Nathaniel watched his father do the same thing. It was not a dramatic transformation. He had learned by now to distrust dramatic transformations. They were the kind of thing that made for satisfying stories, but rarely held up against the daily friction of actual living. What his father was doing was quieter and slower and more real than transformation. He was adjusting, recalibrating, learning at 43 to operate by a different set of principles than the ones that had governed him for 20 years, and doing it imperfectly and sometimes badly, and without the benefit of anyone telling him he was doing it right. Nobody told him. That was not the arrangement. But Nathaniel watched. He watched his father attend every council meeting through the fall of 1819 and contribute to them with increasing usefulness. He watched him sit with the senior field manager after the harvest accounting and ask questions that demonstrated he had been paying attention to the crop numbers, specific questions, technical ones, the kind that could only come from someone who had decided to actually understand the thing rather than simply appear to. He watched him write to Edward in Boston, a letter Nathaniel only knew about because Hannah mentioned it, not because he'd read it. And Hannah mentioned it because Edward wrote back within the month, which she said was faster than Edward typically responded to anyone. I didn't know what the letter said. He didn't ask. But something in his father's bearing shifted in the weeks after Edward's response arrived. Something settled. Not contentment. It wasn't that, and Nathaniel was careful not to call it something it wasn't. But a kind of groundedness that hadn't been there before. As though his father had been waiting without knowing. He was waiting for some external acknowledgement that the effort was real, and the acknowledgement had arrived, and now he could proceed. People needed different things to keep going. Nathaniel was learning that. His mother needed almost nothing external. She ran on internal fuel, some engine of clarity and principle that seemed to generate its own forward motion. His father needed to know that someone he respected had seen him and found him not entirely beyond repair. Both of these were true things about two real people, and neither of them said anything about weakness or strength. They just said something about the specific ways two specific people were built. He filed it. He kept watching. November of 1819 brought the annual land review, a formal process required by the terms of the restructured estate council, by which all the Brooks holdings were assessed, documented, and recorded with Robert Alderman's firm in Richmond. It was in practical terms a great deal of paperwork and several long meetings and the sort of administrative effort that produced nothing glamorous but constituted. His mother said the actual foundation of any lasting estate management. Nathaniel sat in on every meeting. Howe was 15 now, and Pemberton had shifted the curriculum substantially, more applied work, more direct engagement with actual documents and real numbers. His mother had begun quietly and without announcement, including him in her morning review sessions, where she went through the week's correspondence and the account summaries and the field reports. She didn't explain why she'd started including him. She didn't need to. He understood that she was teaching him. Something had been teaching him something for the past year and a half, and that the teaching had simply moved into a new phase. I understood as he sat through the November review meetings and watched his mother work and watched his father contribute and watched Robert Alderman's practiced, careful management of the room that what he was being prepared for was real and was coming. Not immediately, but it was coming. He sat up straighter. He paid closer attention. He asked at the second meeting a question about the terms of the mill contract that Pemberton had told him to ask not to perform knowledge, but because the answer would tell him something he genuinely needed to understand. The estate manager looked at him. Robert Alderman looked at him. His mother looked at him with the specific quality of look she used when she was noting something she intended to return to later. His father looked at him and said nothing, and the expression on his face was one Nathaniel stored carefully for later examination. It was pride. Unguarded, genuine, and complicated by something else. Something that might have been grief for all the meetings he had missed and all the years he had not been paying this kind of attention, but underneath all of that uncomplicated pride. Nathaniel absorbed it, let himself feel it, then put it aside and focused back on the answer the estate manager was giving him. The twist that arrived in December was not one anyone had prepared for because it came from a direction no one had been watching. It came from Caroline Whitmore, not from Caroline herself. She had gone into the life that Elizabeth had quietly pointed her toward the Alderman family connection in Richmond, and by all accounts she was doing well in it, which was the kind of outcome that required a certain generosity of spirit to feel entirely comfortable about. And Nathaniel thought his mother had that generosity in sufficient quantity. The letter came from Caroline's brother Thomas, the same Thomas Whitmore who had arrived at Brooks Estate the previous September in a temper and left with an apology. Thomas Whitmore wrote to Elizabeth Brooks directly. He wrote carefully. He explained that he had been conducting over the past several months a review of the circumstances surrounding his sister's involvement with William Brooks, what she had been told, what she had believed, what had actually been the case, because he felt as her brother that he had an obligation to understand it fully, and because he intended, if the evidence supported it, to take certain legal actions against the parties who had misrepresented material facts to his sister. How was not? He wrote seeking anything from Elizabeth Brooks. He wanted only to inform her of his intentions as a matter of courtesy. But there was a second piece of information in the letter. Thomas Whitmore had in the course of his review spoken to several people in Philadelphia who had known William Brooks during the months of the Philadelphia venture. And in those conversations, he had learned something. The Philadelphia venture had not been a straightforward business failure. William Brooks had entered into it under terms that were not what they had appeared. The man who had offered the arrangement, the investment, the potential returns, had himself been operating under fraudulent premises. He had taken William's commitment and several other investors' commitments and used them to settle prior debts of his own, a scheme that had been under investigation by a Philadelphia Creditors Association for several months. William Brooks had not been the architect of the fraud. He had been one of its victims. Nathaniel heard his mother read this part of the letter twice, standing in the study, before she set it down. She stood very still for a moment. Then she sat down. She did not tell his father immediately. She sat with it for a full day alone, working through what it meant and what it changed and what it didn't change in the specific methodical way she processed everything that required her to separate her feelings about a thing from the facts of the thing. Nathaniel knew she was sitting with something because of the quality of her silence at dinner that evening. Not troubled, not exactly troubled. More like someone who is doing arithmetic in their head and has gotten to a sum that is not what they expected and is working out whether to trust the calculation. She told him about the letter the next morning. She told him before she told his father. Nathaniel wasn't sure why she told him first, but he thought it was because she needed to say it to someone she trusted completely before she had to say it to the person it was most about. He was deceived, Nathaniel said. Significantly, his mother said. The debt was not. It was not the product of his recklessness alone. He was sold a false arrangement by a man who made a practice of doing that to people. Does that change things? Nathaniel said. His mother looked at him. It changes the arithmetic, she said. Not the other things. What he did with the trust, the choices he made before the Philadelphia venture, those stand as they were. The letter doesn't reach back and correct those. She paused. But it does change my understanding of where this past year left him. What he was carrying when he came back from Philadelphia. He came back knowing he'd been used, and he didn't use that as an excuse for anything. He just came back and asked if he could come home and agreed to the terms, and went to work. Nathaniel thought about that. He didn't tell you, he said. No, his mother said. Why not, do you think? She was quiet for a moment. Because, she said slowly, I think he believed he didn't deserve the sympathy it might have earned him. He'd done enough on his own to warrant the consequences, and using the Philadelphia situation to soften those consequences would have felt to him like one more self-serving maneuver. And he was trying very hard not to make those anymore. Nathaniel sat with this. That's not nothing. He said the phrase he'd borrowed from Hannah a long time ago that he kept finding true. No, his mother said. It is not nothing. She told his father that evening in the study with the door closed. Nathaniel did not listen at the door. He was 15, and he had made a quiet private decision sometime in the past year that there were things he was going to trust his parents to handle without him needing to witness every word of, and this was one of them. He sat in the library and read, or tried to read, and listened instead to the silence. The long contained, genuinely quiet silence of two people in a room having a conversation that did not raise its voice because it didn't need to. When his father came out, he walked past the library doorway and stopped. He looked at Nathaniel. His face was... Nathaniel searched for the word and found it undone. Not broken. Undone. Like something that had been held in a particular careful shape for a long time and had just been gently released. You knew, his father said. Since this morning, Nathaniel said. Mama told me first. His father nodded slowly, as though this made sense to him. She would, he said not unkindly. He stood in the doorway for a moment. He looked like a man who had received news that was not good news or bad news, but was true news, and was in the process of integrating it. I should have told her, he said. About what happened in Philadelphia. What Holt did. I should have told her. Why didn't you? Nathaniel asked. His father looked at him steadily. Because I'd already given her so many reasons not to believe my account of anything, he said. I thought if I told her I'd been cheated, it would sound like an excuse. And I didn't want to offer one more excuse. I wanted to just... He stopped. I wanted to do the work, without the excuse. I know, Nathaniel said. Mama knows. His father absorbed this. He looked down for a moment, then back up. She's a better person than I've been, he said. Than I've deserved. Nathaniel looked at him directly. Yes, he said. She is. He paused. So be better. You've been trying to. Keep trying. His father looked at him, that look again, the full attention one, the one that had been so long in coming and still landed with weight every time it arrived. When did you get so clear-eyed? He said. I had a good teacher, Nathaniel said. His father breathed out slowly. He pressed his hand briefly against the doorframe, not quite holding himself up, but touching something solid. Good night, son, he said. Good night, sir, Nathaniel said. His father went to his room. Nathaniel sat in the library for a long time afterward, alone with the lamplight and Plutarch and the quiet sound of the house breathing around him. And he thought about honesty, about how it was not one single clean thing, but a whole practice made of many small moments, and about how his father was slowly and imperfectly and late learning it. Late was not the same as never. He thought his mother knew that. He thought maybe that had always been the deeper bet she was making. January of 1820 brought a formal letter from Robert Alderman that contained among its several practical provisions. One item that drew Nathaniel up short when his mother read it to the household during the weekly review. The restructuring of the estate trust, as drafted the previous year, had included a provision that Alderman was now formally activating one that named Nathaniel Brooks, currently aged 15, as a junior co-signatory on all estate decisions exceeding a certain financial threshold, effective upon his 16th birthday in June. His mother had included this provision. She had included it without discussing it with him first, which he might have objected to on principle if he hadn't understood immediately and entirely why she'd done it the way she'd done it. She hadn't asked him because she hadn't needed his permission to protect his interests, and because asking him would have turned it into a conversation about whether he wanted it, and that was not the relevant question. The relevant question was whether it was right for the estate and for his future, and she had determined that it was. He looked at her across the table. She looked back at him with the particular expression she wore when she had made a decision she was entirely prepared to defend and was waiting to see if defense would be required. You might have mentioned it, he said. I am mentioning it, she said. He held the look for a moment. Then he said, all right. His father said from the other end of the table, it's the right call. He said it without any particular inflection, not grudging, not performatively enthusiastic, just flat and true. It should have always been structured that way. Nobody said anything to that for a moment. Then Nathaniel said, thank you, sir. His father nodded. He looked back at his papers. The meeting went on. Spring arrived, and with it came a visitor. Nathaniel had not expected, and whose presence, when it materialized, felt less like a surprise than like the completion of something that had been taking shape for a while. Judge Robert's father, the elder man who had known the Brooks family since Nathaniel was born, came to the estate on a warm April afternoon without his son, which was unusual, and asked to speak with Elizabeth alone, which was more unusual still. Howe was in the study for almost an hour. Nathaniel was in the east field with Thomas when he heard the carriage arrive and recognized it, and came back to the house partly out of curiosity and partly out of the instinct developed over the past 2 years, that things that happened at Brooks' estate tended to matter more than they appeared to on the surface, and that showing up to pay attention was never wasted effort. He waited in the hall. When the study door opened and the judge came out, he was moving with the careful, measured pace of an old man who had just had a conversation that had required something of him. Not in a troubled way, but in the way of a man who has discharged a responsibility he has been carrying for a while and is now lighter for it. He saw Nathaniel in the hall. Young Brooks, he said, and his voice was warm and specific in the way that people's voices were when they were seeing a child they'd known and finding the young person it had become. "You've grown considerably." "Yes, sir," Nathaniel said. "Is everything—" "Come with me a moment," the judge said, and went to the east porch, and Nathaniel followed. They stood on the porch in the April warmth, and the judge looked at the fields and said without preamble, "Your grandfather, your mother's father, was a man I admired greatly. Did you know that—" "I knew they were acquainted," Nathaniel said. "More than that," the judge said. "He was one of the 3 or 4 men in my life whose counsel I genuinely valued. He died before he could see what his daughter became, which is—" He paused. "Which is a loss. He would have been very proud." Nathaniel was quiet. "I came today," the judge said, "because there is a matter I have known about for some time and have been uncertain how to address. I am addressing it now because I believe the moment is right, and because your mother deserves to know, and because I am old enough to have learned that the longer you wait to say true things, the more the waiting costs you." Nathaniel looked at him. "What matter?" The judge was quiet for a moment. "There is a letter," he said. "It has been in my possession for 3 years. It was given to me by a man, a clerk in a Richmond firm, who had encountered it in the course of settling another client's affairs, and brought it to me because he recognized the names involved and did not know what else to do with it." He reached into his coat. The letter was in a plain envelope aged at the corners, the paper inside visible at one edge where it had been opened and refolded many times. "It is a letter," the judge said, "written by your grandfather to your mother approximately 6 months before he died. It appears to have been intercepted before it reached her." He paused. "I believe you will find when your mother reads it that your grandfather's instructions regarding certain assets he intended specifically for your mother were considerably different from what was ultimately documented in the estate settlement." Nathaniel took the envelope. He looked at it. His mother's name was written on the front, in a hand he didn't recognize. An old hand, careful and slightly formal, the hand of a man who had written many letters and considered each one. "Why didn't you give this to her before?" Nathaniel said. His voice was even. He was working to keep it even. "Fear," the judge said without flinching. "Not for myself, for what it would mean for the settlement for the parties involved. And then I confess inertia. And then watching what happened in this household these past years, I understood that I had let inertia excuse what was simply cowardice, and that was not something I intended to carry any longer." Nathaniel held the letter. He looked at the judge for a long moment, with the clear, direct, full-attention gaze that he had been developing for 2 years, that his mother had taught him by practice and example, that asked of a thing exactly what it was. "Thank you," he said, "for bringing it now." The judge looked at him steadily. "You're very like her," he said. "The way she holds things, the way she looks at people." "I know," Nathaniel said. "I've worked at it." He brought the letter to his mother. She was at the desk when he came in, which was where she usually was, and she looked up when he entered and saw the envelope in his hand and went very still. "Judge Alderman left this," Nathaniel said. "He explained what it is. I think you should read it before I tell you what he said." She took the envelope. She looked at the front of it for a long time at her own name in her father's hand, a hand she hadn't seen in 7 years. Her hands were perfectly steady when she opened it. Nathaniel watched her read. He watched her eyes move down the page, and then stop, and then start again from a different point. He watched something move through her face that he had almost never seen there. Not shock exactly, but something adjacent to it. The expression of a person who has just received confirmation of something they had not quite dared to believe was true. She read it twice, maybe 3 times. He stopped counting. Then she set it down on the desk, and she put her hands flat against the desk surface, and she breathed in slowly. "What is it?" Nathaniel said quietly. "My father," she said. Her voice was entirely steady, which was its own kind of statement. "Before he died, he documented clearly and specifically a portion of the family assets that he intended to pass directly to me. Not through my husband, not subject to the marital estate arrangement. Directly to me under terms that would have given me independent legal standing over property in my own name." Nathaniel was very still. That didn't happen, he said. No, she said. It did not. She looked at the letter again. Because this letter, his instructions, his intentions clearly written, never reached me. It was held somewhere by someone for 7 years. She paused. I don't know yet by whom or why or how much of the settlement was altered as a result. That will require Robert and a great deal of careful work to determine. But the assets may still be traceable, she said, may be recoverable legally, depending on how the settlement was constructed and by whose authority and on what basis. She paused. It is not certain, but it is possible. Nathaniel looked at her. She was not crying. His mother did not cry over things like this, not because she was made of stone, but because her particular form of feeling ran deep and interior, and did not express itself in ways that required witnessing. But there was something in her face that he recognized as the closest she came to it. A kind of held intensity, a fullness in the eyes, a quality of presence that was too large for the room. He didn't forget you, Nathaniel said. She looked at him. Your father, Nathaniel said. He wrote it down. He made it clear. He didn't whatever happened to the letter, he did what he meant to do. His mother looked at him for a long moment. Yes, she said. He did. The room was very quiet. After a while, she picked up the letter again carefully, as though it were something that could still be damaged, and she folded it back along its original lines, and she placed it in the drawer of the desk. The locked one, the one where the most important documents lived, and she sat up straight and looked at Nathaniel. I'm going to write to Robert tonight, she said. I know, he said. This will be a long process, she said. It may produce something, it may not. I know, he said again. She looked at him, really looked the way she did when she was seeing him clearly and wanted him to know it. Thank you, she said, for how you handled it with the judge, for bringing it to me the way you did. You taught me how, he said. She was quiet for a moment. Go get your father, she said then. Nathaniel looked at her. Are you certain? He's part of this estate, she said. He needs to know, and he will. She paused and chose her words exactly. He will want to know. I believe that now. Nathaniel went. He found his father in the south field, rebuilt now green again, the burned ground, long since recovered into new growth, and he said, Mama needs you in the study, and watched his father straighten, immediately read something in Nathaniel's face, and start toward the house without asking for explanation. The three of them sat in the study together. Elizabeth told William about the letter. She told him plainly with all the facts without editorializing. She laid it out the way she laid everything out, the shape of it, the implications, the uncertainties, the path forward. His father listened. He listened with his full attention, which was something that cost him nothing now and had cost him everything 2 years ago. And when she finished, he said, Robert needs to see this immediately. Tonight, his mother said. I'm writing to him tonight. I'll ride to Richmond in the morning, his father said. In person. This isn't something that should wait on the post. His mother looked at him. You don't have to. I know I don't have to, his father said. I want to. This is your family's matter. You've handled my family's disasters long enough. Let me do this one thing that is actually useful. A pause. All right, his mother said. Thank you, William. He nodded. He looked at the locked drawer where the letter was. He looked at his wife. Your father was a good man, he said. He deserved better from whoever kept that from you. Yes, she said. He did. They sat together in the study for a while after that. All three of them in the lamplight, in the quiet of an April evening, with something between them that was not what it had been before, and was not what it might have been, but was for the first time in a very long time honest, not repaired, not restored, not back to any original condition that any of them would have claimed was the right one, but honest, and forward-facing, and shared. Outside the south field was green. The estate was standing. And Nathaniel Brooks, 15 years old, and more grown than most people twice his age would ever manage, sat in the chair his grandfather would have chosen in the house his grandfather had helped build and understood. Not in the way of sentiment, but in the way of actual knowledge earned and tested that some things were worth the years they cost. Some things came through exactly as they were supposed to, and some of the best of them were simply true things. Finally found. Finally given their right name. Robert Alderman rode to Brooks Estate himself when he received Elizabeth's letter. I didn't send a clerk. He didn't post a reply. He came in person the morning after William had ridden to Richmond, which meant the two of them had crossed somewhere on the road, and Robert had turned around and come anyway, because what Elizabeth had described in her letter was not something that could be handled at a distance by a man who took his responsibilities seriously. He arrived before breakfast. Nathaniel was the one who met him at the door, because Hannah had her hands full, and his father hadn't returned yet, and his mother was already in the study, with the letter open on the desk in front of her. He showed Robert in, and Robert shook his hand. Not the practiced professional handshake he used in meetings, but a real one. The kind that communicated something and said, "Your father rode to my office yesterday." "I know," Nathaniel said. "He told me everything before I'd even read your mother's letter," Robert said. "He had the facts in the right order. He was precise about it. I want you to know that." Nathaniel looked at him steadily. "I'll tell him you said so." Robert nodded. He went to the study. Nathaniel closed the door behind him and went to the kitchen and told Hannah that Robert Alderman would need coffee and probably a full breakfast because the man had clearly been riding since before dawn and was going to be in that study for several hours. Hannah looked at him. "You're going to be all right, you know," she said. "Not about the morning, about everything." "I know," Nathaniel said. "We all are." She put the kettle on. The legal process that followed the discovery of the letter was not fast. It moved the way legal processes moved in 1820. Virginia carefully through the correct channels, with the appropriate documentation at every stage, and with the patience of people who understood that the right outcome reached slowly, was worth more than a fast outcome that couldn't hold. Robert Alderman spent 2 weeks in the Brooks Estate study, and 2 weeks in his Richmond office, and another week making inquiries that he described to Elizabeth only in general terms, until he had something specific enough to report. When he reported it, he asked both of Nathaniel's parents to be present. Nathaniel sat at the table too. No one asked him to leave. Robert laid out what he had found with the same methodical care he brought to everything. The letter from Elizabeth's father had been written and sealed and given to a courier. The courier had delivered it not to Brooks Estate, but to the offices of the law firm that had handled the elder man's estate settlement, a firm whose senior partner had been. It emerged closely connected to the arrangement by which Elizabeth's marital settlement had been structured. The letter had sat in that firm's files misfiled or deliberately set aside for 7 years. The senior partner of that firm had died in 1817. His successor had no knowledge of it. So it was one man, William said. One decision, Robert said carefully. Whether it was deliberate suppression or negligence, I cannot determine with certainty at this remove. What I can determine is the effect. He opened his folder. The assets your father-in-law designated for your wife's independent holdings were subsequently folded into the general marital estate without the separate trust structure he had specified. The value of those assets at the time of his death, adjusted for the intervening years and the income they would have generated. He named a figure. The room was quiet for a long moment. His mother said, "Is it recoverable?" "A portion of it," Robert said. "Not all. Some of the assets were liquidated in ways that cannot be traced back specifically enough to establish a claim. But there is a core property holding specifically that were transferred in a manner that the letter's instructions now properly documented call into question. We have a legitimate legal basis to petition." "Then we petition," William said. Everyone looked at him. He met the looks without flinching. He looked at Elizabeth. "It's yours," he said. "It was always supposed to be yours. We petition." Elizabeth looked at her husband for a moment, the long, clear-eyed look she gave things she was assessing honestly. "Yes," she said. "We do." The petition was filed in April of 1820 and moved through the Richmond courts over the following 8 months with the grinding, deliberate pace of institutional machinery that has been asked to correct something it would have preferred not to acknowledge. During those 8 months, Brooks' estate ran as it always had. The spring planting went forward. The summer harvest came in stronger than the previous year, partly because of the improvements the council had approved to the south field drainage after the fire improvements that had been Nathaniel's suggestion made at a council meeting in February, with more confidence than he'd felt, because Pemberton had told him to say the thing, even when he wasn't certain, because certainty was less valuable than accuracy, and accuracy was the thing worth developing. The council had approved the drainage improvement without significant debate. Thomas had looked at Nathaniel afterward and said, "Good call, Mr. Brooks." And it was the first time anyone had addressed him that way, and he'd registered it carefully and then gone back to work. His father noticed. He said nothing at the time, but that evening he came to find Nathaniel in the library and said, "Thomas called you Mr. Brooks today." "He did," Nathaniel said. "How did it feel?" Nathaniel thought about it honestly. "Like something that was always going to happen," he said. "But that I needed to earn first." His father looked at him for a moment. "You've earned it," he said. "Not because of the name, because of the work." "I know the difference," Nathaniel said. "I know you do," his father said. "That's the thing, son. That's exactly the thing." He turned and left. Nathaniel sat with it for a moment, the specific weight of being seen accurately by someone who had not always looked carefully enough, and then he went back to his book. The court ruling came in December of 1820. It was a partial ruling. Law was never as clean as justice, but it was substantial. A portion of the property holdings identified in Robert Alderman's petition were ordered transferred to Elizabeth Brooks under the terms her father had originally specified, held in a trust in her name, independent of the marital estate administered according to her direction. It was not everything. But it was real, and it was hers, and it had her father's name on it in the founding documents, and that mattered in a way that transcended the financial figure. Robert brought the paperwork to the estate on a cold December morning. He spread it across the study desk and walked Elizabeth through every page. Nathaniel stood against the far wall and watched his mother read each document with the same precision she'd brought to every document for as long as he could remember, and he watched her sign her name where Robert indicated, and he watched the moment after the last signature when she set the pen down and sat back and looked at what was in front of her. She didn't speak for a moment. Then she said quietly to no one in particular, or perhaps to her father, wherever fathers went, "I have it now." Nathaniel's throat tightened. He didn't say anything, neither did Robert. They gave her the moment because it was hers, and because some things don't need a response, they only need to be witnessed. His father, who had been standing in the doorway because he had known enough to be present and enough not to crowd it, came into the room and stood beside his wife. He didn't touch her. He just stood beside her, close. She reached across without looking and pressed her hand briefly over his. Then she straightened. She picked up the pen, and she said, "What else needs signing?" Nathaniel turned 16 in June of 1821, and the co-signatory provision his mother had embedded in the estate trust became active, and he signed his first official estate document, a commercial contract with a Richmond tobacco buyer standard terms. Nothing extraordinary in the presence of his mother, Robert Alderman, and the senior estate manager. He signed it clearly, and without ceremony, the way his mother signed things. Robert witnessed it. The manager witnessed it. His mother looked at the signature for a moment and then looked at him. "How does it feel?" she asked, which was not a question she asked often because she generally trusted that feelings could be reported without prompting. She was asking now because she wanted to know. "Like responsibility," he said. "The real kind." She nodded. "Good. That's what it is." He blotted the ink. He handed the contract to Robert. The meeting concluded, and the next one began, and the estate went on. The last real test came that fall, and it came in a form that Nathaniel had not anticipated, because it came not from outside the family, but from within it. His father got sick. Not dramatically, not the kind of illness that announces itself with clear urgency. The kind that starts quietly as a cough that doesn't resolve, and a fatigue that settles in and stays. The kind that a man who has spent 40 years believing himself fundamentally robust tends to dismiss until dismissal is no longer possible. By October, his father was spending more time in his room than out of it. The estate physician came twice a week. He was not despairing. He was not that kind of doctor, but he was direct, and what he said to Elizabeth and to Nathaniel together in the study was that William Brooks needed to rest substantially and that the physical demands of the harvest season could not fall to him this year. "I'll handle the harvest," Nathaniel said. The physician looked at him. He was 16, which was not old, but he said it with the specific quality of certainty that made the physician look at him a second time and then look at Elizabeth. Elizabeth said, "He will." That was all. Nathaniel ran the harvest. He ran IT with Thomas and the field managers, and the guidance of the council, and the steady ever-available counsel of his mother, who worked alongside him every day without taking it from him, pointing out when he'd missed something, asking questions that led him to the answer, rather than giving the answer, stepping back every time he was doing it right to let him know by her silence that he was doing it right. It was the hardest 6 weeks of his life to that point. It was also, by any measurable standard, successful. The yield came in within 3% of the projection. The contracts were fulfilled. The buyers received their agreed quantities. The accounts closed clean. When it was done, Nathaniel sat in the study in his mother's chair, which he had taken without thinking, because it was the chair that faced the desk most squarely, and the desk was where the work was, and he went through the final accounting one more time, and he found no errors, and he closed the ledger. He sat there for a while in the quiet. Hannah came in, which she did sometimes, when she had determined that someone needed company and was too stubborn to seek it themselves. She sat in the chair across from him and looked at him and said, "Well." "Well," he said. "You did it." "We did it," he said. "It wasn't only me." "No," she agreed. "But you were the one it rested on, and it held." She paused. "Your mama is proud. She won't say it that way, but she is." "I know," he said. "Your papa." She paused, choosing something. "Your papa asked me this morning how the final numbers came in." He asked like a man who was afraid of the answer. I told him strong, and he closed his eyes for a moment. She paused. "That's all. Just that." Nathaniel looked at the closed ledger. "I'm going to go see him," he said. His father was sitting up in bed, which was more than he'd managed the previous afternoon, and he looked at Nathaniel when he came in with the alert present attention. That illness sometimes stripped people down to all the performance gone, just the person. "Harvest is done," Nathaniel said. "I heard," his father said. "Numbers strong, within 3% of projection, all contracts fulfilled." His father nodded. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Tell me how you handled the Carver contract dispute." Thomas mentioned there was a dispute, so Nathaniel told him. He told him the whole of it, the buyer who had tried to adjust the agreed price after delivery, the way Nathaniel had gone back to the signed contract, the conversation he'd had with the buyer's representative, in which he had been courteous and absolutely immovable, the resolution that had come when the representative understood that immovable was the accurate description. His father listened to all of it. When Nathaniel finished, his father said, "You didn't give an inch." "It wasn't mine to give," Nathaniel said. "It was the estate's." His father looked at him steadily. "When I was your age," he said, "I would have found a way to make the resolution about me. My cleverness, my handling of it. I would have told the story differently." "I know," Nathaniel said. "You didn't." "No." His father breathed out slowly. He looked at the window, at whatever was beyond it. "You're going to be fine," he said. "This estate is going to be fine. Your mother and I—" He stopped, corrected. "Your mother made sure of that, years ago before any of us understood what she was doing." He paused. "I want you to know that I know that I understand it now. What she did, what it cost her, and what she did anyway." "Have you told her?" Nathaniel said. A pause. "Not in the words she deserves," his father said. "Then tell her," Nathaniel said. "When you're stronger, tell her in the words she deserves." His father looked at him. The full attention look, which was easier for him now than it had been 3 years ago, because he had practiced it, because he had chosen to practice it, because some things you learn only when you have lost enough to understand what learning costs. "You're not afraid of me anymore," his father said. It wasn't an accusation. It was an observation made with something that was not quite sorrow and not quite wonder. "I never was afraid of you," Nathaniel said, and then because honesty was the thing he had learned to value above comfort. "I was afraid of what you might take from us. There's a difference." His father sat with that. "Yes," he said quietly. "There is." Nathaniel stood. "Rest," he said. "The estate will be here when you're well." He left his father's room and went down the hall and found his mother in the study. Always the study, the lamplight, the papers. And he stood in the doorway, and she looked up and he said, "He's better today." "I know," she said. "I checked on him this morning." "He wants to tell you something," Nathaniel said. "When he's stronger, let him." His mother looked at him steadily. "All right," she said, simply without complication. "All right," he said, and went to bed. His father recovered through the winter slowly, and not entirely. His health was changed by that illness in ways that were permanent, and everyone understood that, including his father, who seemed to receive this information with a kind of equanimity that surprised Nathaniel until he thought about it and understood that perhaps a man who has already lost the things he most needed to lose arrives at physical limitation with less resistance than one who hasn't. Howe was not an invalid. He came back to the council meetings in February. He contributed. He was useful. He was more useful, Nathaniel thought, than he had ever been in his life, because he was no longer using the contribution to make a point about himself. He just did the work, and the work was good. In March of 1822, on a day when the first real warmth of the year had arrived, and the Brooks land was stirring into its annual insistence on green, William Brooks found his wife in the garden. Not the study, not anywhere he could predict, but standing in the garden with her hands in her pockets and her face tilted up to the pale spring sun, the way a person tilts their face to something they have been waiting for. He came and stood beside her. He said, "Elizabeth." She turned to look at him. He said the things he had owed her for years. Not all of them. Some things cannot be fully said because language is insufficient to their weight, but the essential ones. He said them clearly and specifically, without softening or deflecting, without making himself the sympathetic figure in any part of it. He named what he had done. He named what it had cost her. He named what she had done in response and what it had required of her, and what he understood now about what it meant. And he said, "I know it doesn't change it. I'm not asking you to tell me it does. I just need you to know that I know, all of it." Elizabeth listened to all of it. She stood in the pale spring sun, and she listened with the still full attention that she gave to everything that mattered. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I know you know. I've watched you know it for 3 years." She paused. What I needed, what I have needed, was for you to say it, out loud, to me." Another pause. "Thank you for saying it." He nodded. They stood in this garden together for a while, not talking, just standing in the same place facing the same direction in the warmth of the first real spring day of 1822. It was not a restoration. It was not a return to anything that had come before, because you cannot return to a before that has been taken apart and rebuilt with different materials. It was something else. Something that had its own name, which was simply this: what they were now. The shape of it true and unsentimental and genuinely theirs. Nathaniel turned 17 that June. He did not make marks on paper anymore to count things. He had learned that some things didn't need counting, they only needed tending. He rode the estate that birthday morning before the household was fully awake in the early light that came in soft and exact over the Virginia fields. And he went south to the field that had burned 4 years ago, the one that had come back green and strong and productive, and he sat on his horse for a moment and looked at it. He thought about his mother at her desk, about his father in the east porch with his glass and his long look, about Hannah folding shirts with the unhurried attention of a person who understood that care was itself a form of authority, about Edward's handshake and Judge Alderman's letter and Robert Alderman's careful, methodical justice, about 143 marks on a piece of ledger paper he had kept in a drawer for a long time and eventually quietly let go of. I thought about all of it. Then he turned his horse toward the house and rode home. He came through the front door as the household was waking, and Hannah pressed a cup of coffee into his hand without asking, and his mother looked up from the desk. Always the desk, always the lamplight, always the work, and said, "Happy birthday, Nathaniel." And his father came down the stairs moving carefully but steadily, the way he moved now, and said, "Happy birthday, son," and sat down at the breakfast table and asked what needed doing today. And Nathaniel sat down too and told him. This was the inheritance that could not be forged or stolen or misfiled in a law firm's cabinet for 7 years. Not the land, though the land was good. Not the accounts, though the accounts were sound. Not the name, though the name meant something in Virginia in the early 19th century, and he was aware of that and intended to make it mean something worth the awareness. The inheritance was this: a mother who had looked at things exactly as they were and acted accordingly at great cost without flinching. A father who had looked at himself exactly as he was and chosen slowly and imperfectly and too late, but not never to be different. A household of people who had held together through something that might have broken them and had come out the other side of it, not unmarked, marked clearly all of them, but still in it. Still here. Still choosing to be. A child does not inherit greatness from a powerful parent. Nathaniel Brooks understood this as a fact. Now, not a sentiment, as clearly and specifically as he understood the tobacco market, or the terms of an estate contract, or the drainage needs of a south field that had once burned. A child earns the life they're going to live by deciding day after day, in the small choices and the large ones, what kind of person they intend to become. He had decided. He was still deciding every morning. And Brooks' estate was standing, and the fields were green, and the people who had built it and broken it and repaired it with their own hands were at the table, and the work was good, and that was enough. That was everything.